The other thing I'd add too is, to some extent, there can also be factors that are outside the state's control. For example, California, its appeals at the federal level are heard in front of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and different circuits throughout the nation will have different approaches to the death penalty just because of the makeup of the judges. And so that can affect how long it'll take. It could be that judges on the Ninth Circuit are more open to arguments that judges in other circuits are not as open to.
Great. One final question. Is lethal injection, albeit still under study as to what's humane and not humane, does it remain the only mechanism to induce death as a capital crime, or are there other modes of execution that are acceptable in the state?
So state law talks about lethal gas or lethal injection. By default, it's lethal injection.
Thank you.
There have been concerns raised by, that the proponents and the opponents probably are well versed in discussing about both methods.
But yeah, our understanding is by default, unless an inmate waives their right to lethal injection, an inmate could theoretically choose lethal gas, though that seems unlikely. That would happen. But other states have looked at other execution methods. I think Utah has looked at using the firing squad. So there are other methods, but in terms of California state law, it's just those two, and it's really lethal injection is the default.
Thank you for your answers.
Okay. And thank you, Mr. Stone. I'm sure as a licensed pharmacist, you probably know a lot about this. So I would suggest that the LAO seek, if you need any expertise on that, to talk to Mr. Stone. But most important, I want you to know the reason you're getting a lot of both fiscal and policy questions is because both the Senate and the Assembly really rely on your impartial analysis to give us the best answers. So that's why you probably, I know we promised to only have fiscal questions, but you probably got bombarded with a lot of policy questions because it's important. And so I'll end with, and I just want you to find out, I don't believe in reinventing the wheel. And if there are other states that have implemented this policy, we really should look at their findings and find out what they've learned so that we can let the public be more informed, where people have started not having or abolishing the death penalty. What have the impacts have been over the first year, first 5 years, or whatever time, and obviously fiscally. I think some members have asked about the crime rates and other things. I think it's really important, if we already have a case study already started, that we need to get those get that information. I would ask for you to get that for this committee, for both committees. And then the other thing, and this is really important for me, is on the fiscal side, because I also believe the devil's in the details. And as we learned from Prop 47, as we started looking at what the savings are, we are $100 million in difference between the LAO and the finance department. And so I would like to get as accurate as we can of what kind of savings we're going to get. Normally when I see a zero at the end of a number, that usually means it's a guesstimate. I think we can do a lot better than that. We can probably drill down to what things we won't do anymore. Like I said, double the guards, solitary confinement, or segregation. We should be able to define those costs and what those costs actually are, so that if this does come to pass, the last thing I would have to happen is to see the same budgets at the same number, and we're supposed to have savings because we didn't accurately define where those savings were going to come from. So if you can look at and maybe talk to CDCR and others to try to pinpoint the costs of the prison guards, food, the cost of cells versus, and maybe pinpoint a little more accurately so that we can make the public more informed about what those savings could actually be.
We have worked extensively with CDCR to get the actual costs. A lot of the uncertainty that has to do with our estimates has to do with the fact that some of these questions won't be answered unless the measure is passed. So I think a good example is the correctional savings. It's going to be up to the administration and the Secretary of CDCR as to whether they'll significantly change their policies about how to house these inmates if they get resentenced. And while we've talked with CDCR, they haven't made a final decision on that. So it's one of those situations where following the implementation of the measure, we'll have a lot more clarity and be able to drill down a lot more closer than we are now.
And I would just add to that, part of it also potentially will rely on kind of legislative direction. And so I think previously we actually mentioned related to the Office of the State Public Defender, and that's kind of a good example. The original mission of the Office of State Public Defender was to provide assistance in appeals, just broadly. But because of California's history of death row and the appeals process there, the state gave them direction that they were to prioritize cases related to direct appeals. And so to the extent this initiative went into place, there then exists the question in terms of, do they go back to their original mission, or are other changes implemented? And so that's kind of a question that would need to be answered.
Okay. Thank you. And we'll bring on the next group to panel discussion, the proponents. And thank you, Ms. Lee and Mr. Soderberg. And so we could have Paula Mitchell, the Executive Director, Project for Innocence, Loyola Law School; Gerald Ullman, Director for the Center for Trial and Appellate Advocacy, Santa Clara Law; Mike Farrell, Official Proponent, Justice at Works Act; and Beth Webb, Anti-Death Penalty Victim Representative. I know we have four speakers. Hopefully we can get most of your testimony within a half hour. As you can see, we have some very inquisitive panel members that probably will have a lot of questions for you. So whoever, Paula Mitchell, want to begin first?
Yes, I'll begin. My mic is on?
Yes.
I'd like to start by thanking the committees for allowing us to appear today to present these comments in support of the Justice That Works Act. It's an initiative that would replace the death penalty in California and make life without the possibility of parole the state's harshest sentence. My name is Paula Mitchell, and I'm the Executive Director of the Alarcon Advocacy Center at Loyola Law School, and I'm the Legal Director of the Project for the Innocent, also at Loyola Law School. It's a wrongful conviction clinic that seeks to exonerate those who are factually innocent of the crimes for which they've been convicted. I have written and researched extensively on the death penalty in California and appeared with late Ninth Circuit Judge Arthur Alarcon before a similar committee in 2011 in support of what was then what came to be known as Prop 34. I will address the committee first and then turn the microphone over to Mr. Mike Farrell, who is the proponent of the initiative, and then Professor Gerald Ullman, who is the Executive Director of the California Commission on the Fair Administration of Justice and the editor of the Commission's final report, and then to Bethany Webb, who will provide her perspective as a victim's family member. Just to answer a couple of questions to start with, I think it was Mr. Monning, the California Constitution currently requires that everyone sentenced to death has an automatic right of appeal directly to the California Supreme Court. So that automatic right of appeal directly to the California Supreme Court is that would be the thing that would change if death penalty goes away. Additionally, in response to the question about whether anyone who is actually innocent has been executed, I believe we have three individuals, Ernest Graham, Troy Jones, and Oscar Morris. Those cases should be looked at. Additionally, there are a number of people who died on death row before their appeals and habeas proceedings were exhausted. So it's entirely possible that there are some innocent people among those. Specifically, Dennis Lawley, I believe he had an actual innocence claim pending when he passed away on death row. So the time has come for California to end the death penalty. The Justice That Works Act provides voters with an opportunity to do that in November, replacing it with life without the possibility of parole. It'll also save the state an estimated $150 million a year, and that's a conservative estimate based on my research. It will relieve the California Supreme Court of having to dedicate fully 1/3 of its entire docket to capital cases and allow the court to focus on more issues that are important to all Californians. California is an outlier when it comes to the death penalty, and not in a good way. We have the largest death row in the Western Hemisphere, and this is in a time when most Western nations, virtually every Western nation, has abolished it. In answer to another question that was asked earlier, there are a number of states that are moving in fairly rapid succession, repealing the death penalty one by one. In the last 9 years, New York, New Jersey, New Mexico, Illinois, Connecticut, Maryland, and Nebraska all have repealed. In Maryland, I know specifically, they embarked on a fairly extensive examination of the cost of the death penalty to the state, and that was in part responsible for their decision to repeal. The governors in Washington, Oregon, Colorado, and Pennsylvania have also put a hold on executions in those states, and it's time for California to join them. There's no longer any real debate about the deterrence question. The National Academy of Sciences, as Mr. Soderberg mentioned, did a thorough investigation and concluded that there really is no reliable evidence that the death penalty deters homicides. The United States Supreme Court Justice Stephen Breyer accurately pointed out earlier this month, California's costly administration of the death penalty embodies 3 fundamental defects. 1, it is seriously unreliable. 2, it is arbitrarily applied. And 3, its unconscionable delays undermine its penological purpose. Justice Breyer is correct on all counts. California's death penalty is costly. It's cost hardworking taxpayers nearly $5 billion over the last 40 years, and it has not achieved a single one of its objectives. In response to the question earlier about disproportionate application, currently about 40% of inmates on death row are African American, 30% are white, and 20% are Hispanic. There's also no sound argument that carrying out executions provides closure or solace to victims' family members, as Ms. Webb will talk about in a minute. Instead of closure, these loved ones are forced to endure decades of appeals, all the while remaining anxious and in suspense over the ultimate fate of those who the state has sentenced to death by execution. As we know, the vast majority of those on death row die of natural causes, not by execution. The system is becoming increasingly dysfunctional with each passing year, and the costs are continuing to mount. Since Prop 34 was narrowly defeated in 2012, taxpayers have spent nearly another $1 billion to keep this failed system going, and in that time, 19 more people have died of natural causes while they wait for their appeals and post-conviction claims to be heard. That figure is bound to increase rapidly because nearly a quarter of those on death row are now between the ages of 60 and 89 years old. Many of them have serious medical and mental health care needs. Because death row is now bloated to some 750 inmates, the system is falling of its own weight. The outcomes are seriously unreliable, and the punishment itself is arbitrarily applied, as Justice Breyer correctly observed. For all of these reasons, and as well as those that will be explained by Professor Uhlman, the system is broken beyond repair. Continuing with this irretrievably dysfunctional system will do little more than throw good money after bad. Equally important, if not more so, and as Mr. Farrell will discuss, so long as we have capital punishment, we risk executing people who are innocent of crimes for which they've been convicted. As the director of the largest wrongful conviction clinic in Los Angeles, I see every day the number of ways and frequency with which our system fails to deliver the kind of perfect justice that's required in a system that executes those it convicts. Such a system demeans the rule of law, our system of justice, and it demeans us as a society. California can and must do better. That concludes my remarks.
Thank you, Ms. Mitchell. Mr. Ullman?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Mike Farrell. Thank you for your time. I'm the proponent of the Justice at Works Act. I've tried to put an end to the death penalty over 35 years because I believe state killing is doing great harm to our state, our country, and its people. With Benjamin Rush, one of our nation's founders, I believe the death penalty has a brutalizing effect on the society that uses it. 35 years ago, Americans were in a different place on this issue. Since then, a growing awareness of exonerations, botched executions, and the incredible costs have caused support in California and nationally to fall steadily. 9 states have forsworn it legally, others have put it on hold or simply don't use it. 141 countries worldwide have abolished the death penalty in law or practice, leaving the U.S. the only developed Western nation to kill its citizens. In the late 80s in Virginia, while attempting to stop the execution of a young man I believed to be innocent, I met with the political advisor of then Governor Douglas Wilder and made our case to stop the execution. After hearing the facts, the man's response was, "In politics, the death penalty cuts only one way: you kill." We continued to press the case, and Governor Wilder finally did stop the execution because, he said, of possible innocence. However, because his Attorney General refused to allow a new trial, that once young man remains in prison today, 25 years after he was scheduled to die, while we continue to try to get justice for him. In the mid-90s in Utah, I was in a meeting beside the mother of a man soon to be executed, asking then-Governor Bangerter to intervene. Her son was involved in the robbery and deserved punishment, she said, but he was outside and did not know his partner in the crime had killed people inside. The governor said he was unable to help, as the jury had spoken. I pointed out that a piece of paper had been found in the jury room after their deliberation. On it was a crude drawing of a gallows with a man's figure hanging from it. Beneath it was printed, "Hang the N-word." The note did not say N-word. The governor did nothing. The death penalty as practiced in our state and our country is racist in application. It is primarily, if not exclusively, used against minorities, the poor, and the poorly defended. Because all aspects of the system are controlled by human beings, capital punishment makes mistakes, imprisoning and sometimes killing the innocent and the wrongly convicted. Because of constitutional requirements, capital punishment is terribly convoluted and time-consuming process that is hideously, obscenely expensive, wasting taxpayer dollars that might otherwise provide social benefit. While efforts to deal with our nation's history of racism struggle to make headway, racial bias, overt, covert, and subconscious, run rampant in our criminal justice system, and it's hideously visible on death row, where those who kill non-Latino whites are over 3 times more likely to be sentenced to die than those who kill African Americans, and those who kill non-Latino whites are over 4 times more likely to be sentenced to die than those who kill Latinos. Robert Smith, senior fellow at Harvard Law School's Charles Hamilton Houston Institute, said most death penalty jurors are white. This, he said, is a big deal because research shows that white jurors tend to implicitly associate black faces with the concept of retribution, implicitly associate white faces with a sense of relative value or worth, show greater support for the death penalty generally, and may be less able to consider mitigating circumstances when they relate to black defendants. In a recent article, Angela Harris of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund wrote, "While black men are no longer lynched before all-white crowds gathered on the courthouse lawn, black men are all too often condemned to death by all-white juries that are produced by prosecutors' deliberate exclusion of people of color, particularly black people, from jury service." Again, overt, covert, or subconscious racism. On wrongful convictions, Professor Sam Gross of the University of Michigan Law School edits the National Registry of Exonerations. In a recent study of 873 exonerations in the period between January of 1989 through February of 2002, 61% of those wrongly convicted and freed were black or Hispanic. On death row cases, Professor Gross published a study in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences showing that 4.1% is a conservative estimate of the proportion of false conviction among death sentences in the United States. According to the Death Penalty Information Center, since 1973, there have been 156 women and men tried, convicted, and sentenced to death in our country, some spending decades awaiting execution, only to finally be exonerated and freed, their lives ruined. During that period, Lee Farmer, Troy Lee Jones, Patrick Croy, Jerry Bigelow, and Charles Bonneau, all here in California, were freed from death row. What we do not know is how many who should have been freed were instead put to death. In discussing habeas corpus issues, former D.C. Circuit Court Judge and White House counsel Abner Mikva said, "I suspect there may well have been innocent people who were executed because of the absence of habeas corpus." The executions of Jesse Tafaro in Florida, Cameron Todd Willingham, Carlos De Luna, Leonel Herrera, and Ruben Cantu in Texas raise serious questions yet to be resolved. Former Texas District Attorney Sam Millsap, who prosecuted Ruben Cantu, now opposes state killing because of that case. So does former Louisiana prosecutor Marty Stroud, who sent Glenn Ford, an innocent man, to death row for 30 years before he was exonerated and freed, broke and terminally ill. Stroud now says the death penalty is a badge that shows how out of touch we are with other civilized societies. For him, the death penalty does not compass justice. It's little more than state-assisted revenge. Here in California, Thomas Thompson insisted on his innocence right up to the moment of his death in 1998. Of his case, Judge Stephen Reinhardt of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals said, Thompson was the first death row inmate in California since capital punishment has been reinstituted to insist on his innocence through to the time of his execution, and he was the first person in the nation ever to be executed on the basis of a trial that an unrefuted decision of a United States Court of Appeals had held to be unconstitutional. I, along with 7 state prosecutors, believe Thompson was wrongly convicted and is a victim of those emphasizing finality over justice. As Paula Mitchell has indicated, she has expertise on the issue of economics of state killing. At a recent event, I had the privilege of introducing 19 women and men who had been wrongly convicted of murder and subsequently exonerated and freed after spending a cumulative total of 399 years in prison for murders they did not commit. The human cost they represent cannot be calculated. And yet another incalculable cost is the emotional price paid, as per Judge Alex Kaczynski of the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. The process visits repeated trauma on victims' family members who are re-victimized throughout the quarter of a century it now takes for a death case to complete the constitutionally required process from sentencing to execution, a process exacerbated by the fact that 2/3 of death convictions are overturned or remanded by state or federal courts. Recent proposals to reduce the number of years it takes to involve legally questionable methods, including mandating court agendas, recruiting untrained lawyers, that will actually lengthen the time it takes while increasing the costs. Anthony Epanovich was sentenced to death in Ohio 32 years ago. 9 years later, I did a video appeal asking then-Governor George Voinovich to stay Epanovich's then impending execution because of a question of improperly tested evidence. 1 week ago, Ohio State Court of Appeals released Mr. Epanovich on bond while the state ponders whether to retry him, since 3 of the original 4 charges lodged against him have been dismissed. One final note. Almost 750 women and men comprise California's death row population. 18 of them, all men, have completed their legal appeals and are to be executed once the CDCR fires up the killing machine. One of them, a man who has consistently proclaimed his innocence for 32 years, has recently presented Governor Brown with newly discovered evidence confirming his claim. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Mr. Farrell.
My name is Gerald Ullman. I'm a professor of law at Santa Clara University, where I served as dean of the School of Law from 1986 to 1994. From 2004 to 2008, I served as executive director of the California Commission on the Fair Administration of Justice, which was established by Senate Resolution number 44, to make recommendations and proposals to ensure that the administration of criminal justice in California is just, fair, and accurate. And I served as the editor of the Commission's final report. In carrying out its charge, the Commission undertook a thorough review and analysis of the administration of the death penalty in California. The first such review conducted since the California death law was enacted in 1977. The 25 commissioners, chaired by former California Attorney General John Vandekamp, included judges, prosecutors, defense lawyers, police chiefs, victim representatives, and scholars. And the commission unanimously concluded that California's death penalty system was dysfunctional and unanimously recommended remedies to repair it, including estimates of the costs of the necessary repairs. We identified 4 alternatives. Alternative number 1 was to do nothing, to continue spending at least $137.7 million a year with the remote possibility of future executions after delays of 30 years. Alternative number 2 was to spend $216.8 million to reduce delays down to the national average of 11 to 14 years. This would have been accomplished by expanding the State Public Defender's Office and the California Habeas Corpus Resource Center to provide competent counsel that met ABA standards. Alternative number 3 was to spend $121 million a year for a narrowed death penalty law, producing 10 to 12 new death sentences each year. Alternative number 4 was to adopt a policy of terminal confinement with a potential immediate saving of $132.2 million per year. The Commission unanimously agreed that alternative number 1 would be the worst possible scenario. The failures in the administration of California's death penalty law, we said, create cynicism and disrespect for the rule of law, increase the duration and costs of confining death row inmates, weaken any deterrent benefits of capital punishment, increase the emotional trauma experienced by murder's victims' families, and delay the resolution of meritorious capital appeals. At the time of our final report in 2008, there were 670 inmates on California's death row, and California had carried out 13 executions. So here we are, 8 years later. We now have 75 additional inmates on death row. There have been no additional executions, and we have poured $1 billion down a rat hole. We've added 8 years to the average delay between sentence and execution, and the chief cause of death on death row remains death from natural causes followed by suicides. Today, the only reasonable alternative left to end this madness is alternative number 4, replacing the death penalty with sentences of life without possibility of parole, which is precisely what the Justice That Works Act initiative would do. Those who suggest the system can still be fixed without massive expenditures to provide competent counsel are deluding themselves and seeking to delude the public. Their proposals would wreak havoc on California's system of justice and spread the dysfunction far beyond our system of death penalty review. The Justice That Works initiative is now the only reasonable alternative left for California to end a system that, in the words of former Chief Justice Ron George, is falling of its own weight. Thank you.
Thank you. And the last 8 minutes to Ms. Webb.